They say that some nights in Nanjing the air carried two smells at once: smoke from burning papers and the antiseptic tang of ether from hospital wards where hands were meant to heal. But in the winter of 1937, those scents braided into something darker: the sharp, metallic promise of instruments used not to mend, but to mark the saving or the ending of a human life. The city, already a geography of fear, found its hospitals and clinics turned into theaters where mercy frayed into method. What follows is not an accusation plucked from rumor, nor a courtroom transcript of tidy verdicts. It is a close listening to testimony, to rumor, to the brittle pages of diaries and the slow unspooling of accounts historians still debate. If this story unsettles you, if it makes your skin tighten at the thought of a healer's hand recoiling from its oath, then you are in the right place. If you want more of these long, unflinching histories told in a cinematic voice that keeps faith with the dead, like and subscribe, and stand with me as we enter a winter when the line between care and cruelty was erased. We will follow doctors whose training was measured in years and whose hands were now measured by the new currency of triage, urgency, rank, and the brittle arithmetic of resources. The atmosphere will be claustrophobic and clinical at once. The hiss of steam from an improvised sterilizer, the hollow knock of a boot echoing down a corridor, the smell of disinfectant masking other, less narratable odors. We will attend small scenes that disclose character. A surgeon arguing in a low voice with a nurse over which patient gets a transfusion. A physician who takes a breath, then signs a form that will decide a family's fate. The chapter will place no simple blame, but will instead explore how institutions bend under the pressure of war, how orders filtered down through uniforms, and how the language of military necessity crept into the hospital ledger. Sensory detail will be particular and human. Pain will be named without becoming spectacle. We will close the chapter with a sound, the tremor of a door that will not open again for some. Experiments, allegations, and the anatomy of denial. Here we press into the most contested and charged aspects of medical horror. Historians disagree about specifics. Where certainty fades, we will say so candidly and treat disputed accounts with care, marking them as testimony, rumor, or historians' reconstruction. This chapter will lay out the allegations that circulated then and have lingered since. Reports of invasive procedures on prisoners, claims of deliberate infection, stories of medical men whose curiosity metastasized into cruelty. But it will also examine the mechanisms that allowed such acts to occur, the chain of command that shielded practitioners, the vocabulary of research and prevention that sanitized brutality, the bureaucracy that made inhumanity legible. We will attend to the slow denials, official gazettes that used euphemism where the body wanted names, the private letters that trembled with guilt or fear, the chances when a single dissenting nurse might have paused a blade. The narration will avoid lurid detail. It will instead focus on the moral architecture that permits harm to pass as science. And it will ask a hard question. How does a profession predicated on saving lives become an apparatus for violence? The mothers who brought children with fevered heads and left with empty arms. The clerks who kept records that would later be used to obscure or invent facts. The physicians who kept notebooks they feared to show. We will dwell on grief as an economy, promises kept, promises broken, and the silent ledger of who was fed when and who was left to cool. Sensory detail will be close and suffocating. The rasp of a child's breath, the knot of wool against a widow's face, the taste of cheap tea offered to the bereaved. We will not reduce people to caricature. We will show the complicated ethical terrain for those who tried to help under orders and under threat. Within these corridors of loss, tiny acts of courage will be visible. A towel smuggled to a freezing infant, a forged signature that bought a few days. The chapter will end on the fragile dignity of small resistances, acts that do not redeem the whole, but keep memory human. Widening our lens, this video traces how stories left the hospital and traveled into the world. Rescue parties, foreign missionaries, journalists, and the quiet networks of refugees all carried versions of what happened. Versions that the press amplified, governments contorted, and families used to seek restitution or revenge. We will examine how rumor and recorded fact braided together, how some narratives hardened into national myths, while others were effaced, and how the search for accountability collided with political expediency. Sensory detail will shift from the hospital's antiseptic to the dry scratch of a reporter's pen, the clink of teacups in anxious embassies, the murmur of townspeople debating truth in marketplaces. This chapter will question who had the power to name crimes and who had the power to bury them, exploring courtroom attempts, diplomatic pressure, and the way memory is negotiated in public fora. It will end with a rhetorical pause. How do societies decide which histories to preserve and which to forget? Legacy, memory, and the quiet work of reckoning. We will be elegiac and searching. We will trace the long shadow cast by those winter hospitals across decades, how descendants inherited stories that were shameful, heroic, or simply bewildering, how authors and filmmakers turned medical horror into cautionary tales, how historians continue to sift evidence and testimony for the bones of truth. This chapter will reflect on what mercy means after catastrophe, whether institutional reform can repair moral breaches, how collective memory both honors and distorts the dead, and whether a profession that once stumbled into atrocity can rebuild trust. The writing will be reverent and unsparing. It will ask us to hold contradictions without resolving them into easy morals. We will close with a meditation on the cost of forgetting and the responsibility to remember with precision and humility. When the city of Nanjing fell in 1937, places meant to heal became rooms of rumor and dread. This cinematic, deeply reported examination traces how hospitals and medical personnel, by choices, orders, and the fog of war, came to stand at the center of some of the most painful questions from that winter. When does care become cruelty? How do professional oaths bend under military logic? And how should history reckon with testimony that is fragmentary, contested, and unbearably human? Drawing on survivor testimonies, wartime reports, and historians' reconstructions, the film moves from the antiseptic hiss of wards to the dry scratch of courtroom paper, from intimate acts of secret mercy to the machinery of denial that followed. We don't sensationalize, we listen, we name uncertainty where it exists, and we refuse tidy answers for lives that were anything but simple. If this video helped you hold the past with rigor and empathy, like, subscribe, and share to keep difficult stories from being forgotten. Sources, further reading, and a content bibliography are linked below for anyone who wants to dig deeper. Comments and respectful reflections are welcome. How should we remember medicine's failures and the people who suffered in their wake?